Pax vobiscum, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to continue reading Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. Today we will begin with Chapter 28, A Job Horse and His Drivers. Hitherto I had always been driven by people who at least knew how to drive, but in this place I was to get my experience of all different kinds of bad and ignorant driving to which we horses are subjected. For I was a job horse, and was let out to all sorts of people who wished to hire me. And as I was good-tempered and gentle, I think I was oftener let out to the ignorant drivers than some of the other horses, because I could be depended on. It would take a long time to tell of all the different styles in which I was driven, but I will mention a few of them. First, there are the tight-rein drivers, men who seem to think that all depended on holding the reins as hard as they could, never relaxing the pull on the horse's mouth, or giving him the least liberty of movement. They are always talking about keeping the horse well in hand and holding a horse up, just as if a horse was not made to hold himself up. Some poor broken-down horses, whose mouths have been made hard and insensible by just such drivers as these, may perhaps find some support in it, but for a horse who can depend upon his own legs, and who has a tender mouth and is easily guided, it is not only tormenting, but it is stupid. Then there are the loose-rein drivers, who let the reins lie easily on our backs, and their own hand rest lazily on their knees. Of course, such gentlemen have no control over a horse if anything happens suddenly. If a horse shies, or starts or stumbles, they are nowhere, and cannot help the horse or themselves till the mischief is done. Of course, for myself I had no objection to it, as I was not in the habit either of starting or stumbling, and had only been used to depend on my driver for guidance and encouragement. Still, one likes to feel the rein a little going downhill, and likes to know that one's driver has not gone to sleep. Besides, a slovenly way of driving gets a horse into bad and often lazy habits, and when he changes hands he has to be whipped out of them with no more or less pain than trouble. Squire Gordon always kept us to our best paces and our best manners. He said that spoiling a horse and letting him get into bad habits was just as cruel as spoiling a child, and both had to suffer for it afterward. Besides, these drivers are often careless altogether, and will attend to anything else more than their horses. I once went out in the phaeton one day with one of them. He had a lady and 2 children behind. He flopped the reins about as we started, and of course gave me several unmeaning cuts with the whip, though I was fairly off. There had been a good deal of road-mending going on, and even where the stones were not freshly laid down there were a great many loose ones about. My driver was laughing and joking with the lady and the children, and talking about the country to the right and to the left, but I never thought it worth while to keep an eye on his horse, or to drive on the smoothest parts of the road. And so it happens that I got a stone in one of my 4 feet. Now, if Mr. Gordon or John, or in fact any good driver, had been there, they would have seen that something was wrong before I had gone 3 paces. Or even if it had been dark, a practised hand would have felt by the rein that there was something wrong in the step, and that he would have got down and picked out the stone. But this man went on laughing and talking, while at every step the stone became more firmly wedged between my shoe and the frog of my foot. The stone was sharp on the inside and round on the outside, which, as everyone knows, is the most dangerous kind that a horse can pick up, at the same time cutting his foot and making him most liable to stumble and fall. Whether the man was partly blind, or at the very least careless, I can't say, but he drove me with that stone on my foot a good half-mile before he saw anything. By that time I was going so lame with the pain that at last he saw it and called out, "Well, here's a go! Why, they have sent us out with a lame horse! What a shame!" He then chucked the reins and flipped about the whip, saying, "Now then, it's no use playing the old soldier with me. There's a journey to go, and it's no use turning lame and lazy." Just at this time a farmer came riding up on a brown cob. He lifted his hat and pulled up. "I beg your pardon, sir," he said, "but I think there's something the matter there with your horse. He goes very much as if he had a stone in his shoe. If you will allow me, I will look at his feet. These loose, scattered stones are confounded dangerous things for these horses." "He's a hired horse," said my driver. "I don't know what's the matter with him, but it is a great shame to send out a lame beast like this." The farmer dismounted, and slipping his rein over his arm, at once took up my near foot. "Bless me, there's a stone. Lame, I should think so." At first he tried to dislodge it with his hand, but as it was now very tightly wedged, he drew a stone pick out of his pocket, and very carefully, and again with some trouble, got it out. Then, holding it up, he said, "There, that's the stone your horse picked up. It is a wonder he did not fall down and break his knees into the bargain." "Well, to be sure," said my driver, "that is a queer thing. I never knew that horses picked up stones before." "Did it you?" said the farmer, rather contemptuously. "But they do, though, and the best of them will do it, and can't help it sometimes on such roads as these. And if you don't want to lame your horse, you must look sharp and get them out quickly. This foot is very much bruised," he said, setting it gently down and patting me. "If I might advise you, sir, you had better drive him gently for a while. The foot is a good deal hurt, and the lameness will not go off directly." Then mounting his cob and raising his hat to the lady, he trotted off. When he was gone, my driver began to flop the reins about and whip the harness, by which I understood I was to go on, which of course I did, glad that the stone was gone, but still in a good deal of pain. This was the sort of experience we job horses often came in for. Then there is the steam engine style of driving. These drivers were mostly people from towns who never had a horse of their own, and generally traveled by rail. They always seemed to think that a horse was something like a steam engine, only smaller. At any rate, they think that if only they pay for it, a horse is bound to go just as far and just as fast, and with just as heavy a load as they please. And be the roads heavy and muddy, or dry and good, be they stony or smooth, uphill or downhill, it is all the same. On and on one must go, and at the same pace, with no relief and no consideration. These people never think of getting out to walk up a steep hill. Oh, no, they have paid to ride, and ride they will. The horse? Oh, he's used to it. What were horses made for, if not to drag people uphill? Walk? A good joke indeed. And so the whip is plied, and the rein is chucked, and often a rough, scolding voice cries out, "Go along, you lazy beast!" And then another slash of the whip, and all the time we are doing our very best to get along, uncomplaining and obedient, though often sorely harassed and downhearted. This steam engine style of driving wears us up faster than any other kind. I would rather go 20 miles with a good, considerate driver than I would go 10 with some of these. It would take less out of me. And another thing, they scarcely ever put on the brake, however steep the downhill may be, and thus bad accidents sometimes happen. Or if they do put it on, they often forget to take it off at the bottom of the hill. More than once I have had to pull halfway up the next hill, with one of the wheels held by the brake, before my driver chose to think about it, and that is a terrible strain on a horse. Then these cockneys, instead of starting at an easy pace as a gentleman would do, generally set off full speed from the very stable-yard, and when they want to stop they first whip us, and then pull so suddenly that we are nearly thrown on our haunches, and our mouths jagged by the bit. I call that pulling up with a dash, and when they turn a corner they do it as sharply as if there were no right or wrong side of the road. I well remember one spring evening I and Rory had been out for the day. Rory was the horse that was mostly went with me when a pair was ordered, and a good honest fellow he was. We had our own driver, and he was always considerate and gentle with us, and we had a very pleasant day. We were coming home at a good smart pace, about twilight. Our road turned sharp to the left, but as we were coming close to the hedge on our own side, and there was plenty of room to pass, our driver did not pull us in. As we neared the corner, I heard a horse and 2 wheels coming rapidly down the hill toward us. The hedge was high, and I could see nothing, but the next moment we were upon each other. Happily for me, I was on the side next to the hedge. Rory was on the left side of the pole, and had not even a shaft to protect him. The man who was driving was making straight for the corner, and when he came in sight of us he had no time to pull over onto his own side. The whole shock came upon Rory. Oh, the gig shaft ran right into the chest, making him stagger back with a cry I shall never forget. The other horse was thrown upon his haunches and one shaft broken. It turned out that it was a horse from our own stables, with the high-wheeled gig that the young men were so fond of. The driver was one of those random, ignorant fellows who didn't even know which is their own side of the road, or, if they knew, they didn't care. And there was poor Rory, with his flesh torn open and bleeding and the blood streaming down. They said if it had been a little more to one side it would have killed him, and a good thing for him, poor fellow, if it had. As it was a long time before the wound healed, and then he was sold for coal carting. And what that is, up and down those steep hills, only horses know. Some of the sights I saw there, where a horse had to come downhill with a heavily loaded two-wheel cart behind him, on which no brake could be placed, makes me sad now to think of. After Rory was disabled, I often went in the carriage with a mare named Peggy, who stood in the stall next to mine. She was a strong, well-made animal, of bright dun colour, beautifully dappled, and with a dark brown mane and tail. There was no high breeding about her, but she was very pretty and remarkably sweet-tempered and willing. Still, there was an anxious look about her eye, by which I knew that she had had some trouble. The first time we went out together, I thought she had a very odd pace. She seemed to go at partly a trot, partly a canter, 3 or 4 paces, and then a little jump forward. It was very unpleasant for any horse who pulled with her, and made me quite fidgety. When we got home, I asked her what made her go in that odd, awkward way. "Ah," she said in a troubled manner, "I know my paces are very bad, but what can I do? It is really not my fault. It is just because my legs are so short. I stand nearly as high as you, but your legs are a good 3 inches longer above your knee than mine, and of course you take a much longer step and go much faster. You see, I did not make myself. I wish I could have done so. I would have had long legs then. All my troubles comes from my short legs," Peggy said in a desponding tone. "But how is it," I said, "when you are so strong and good-tempered and willing?" "Why, you see," said she, "men will go so fast, and if one can't keep up to other horses, it is nothing but whip, whip, whip all the time, and so I have had to keep up as I could, and have got this ugly shuffling pace. It was not always so. When I lived with my first master, I always went at a good regular trot, but then he was not in such a hurry. He was a young clergyman in the country, and a good kind master he was. He had 2 churches a good way apart, and a great deal of work, but he never scolded or whipped me for not going faster. He was very fond of me. I only wish I was with him now. But he had to leave and go to a large town, and then I was sold to a farmer. Some farmers, you know, are capital masters, but I think this one was a low sort of man. He cared nothing about good horses or good driving. He only cared for going fast. I went as fast as I could, but that would not do, and he was always whipping. So I got into this way of making a spring forward to keep up. On market nights he used to stay very late at the inn, and then drive home at a gallop. One dark night he was galloping home as usual, when all of a sudden the wheel came up against some great heavy thing in the road, and turned the gig over in a minute. He was thrown out, and his arm broken, and some of his ribs, I think. At any rate, it was the end of my living with him, and I was not sorry. But you see, it will be the same everywhere for me, if men must go so fast. I wish my legs were longer." Poor Peggy! I was very sorry for her, and I could not comfort her, for I knew how hard it was upon slow-paced horses. But to be put with the fast ones, all the whipping comes to their share, and they can't help it. She was often used in the phaeton, and was very much liked by some of the ladies, because she was so gentle, and some time after this she was sold to two ladies who drove themselves and wanted a good, safe horse. I met her several times out in the country, going a good steady pace, looking as gay and contented as a horse could be. I was very glad to see her, for she deserved a good place. After she left, another horse came in her stead. He was young and had a bad name for shying and starting, by which he had lost a good place. I asked him what made him shy. "Well, I hardly know," he said. "I was timid when I was young, and was a good deal frightened several times, and if I saw anything strange I used to turn and look at it. You see, with our blinkers, one can't see or understand what a thing is unless one looks round, and then my master always gave me a whipping, which of course made me start on, and did not make me less afraid. I think if he would have just let me look at things quietly and see that there was nothing to hurt me, it would have been all right, and I should have got used to them. Well, one day an old gentleman was riding with him, and a large piece of white paper or rag or something blew across just on one side of me. I shied and started forward. My master, as usual, whipped me smartly, but the old man cried out, 'You're wrong, you're wrong. You should never whip a horse for shying. He shies because he is frightened, and you only frighten him more and make the habit worse.' So I suppose all men don't do so. I am sure I don't want to shy for the sake of it, but how should one know what is dangerous and what is not if one is never allowed to get used to anything? I'm never afraid of what I know. Now, I was brought up in a park where there were deer, and of course I knew them as well as I did a sheep or a cow, but they are not common, and I know many sensible horses who are frightened of them, and who kick up quite a shindy before they will pass a paddock where there are deer." I knew what my companion said was true, and I wish that every young horse had as good as masters as Farmer Gray and Squire Gordon. Of course, we sometimes came in for good driving here. I remember one morning I was put into the light gig and taken to a house on Pulteney Street. Two gentlemen came out. The taller of them came round to my head. He looked at the bit and bridle, and just shifted the collar with his hand to see if it fitted comfortably. "Do you consider this horse wants a curb?" he said to the hostler. "Well," said the man, "I should say he would go just as well without. He has an uncommon good mouth, and though he has fine spirit, he has no vice, but we find that generally people like the curb." "I don't like it," said the gentleman. "Be so good as to take it off, and put that rein at the cheek. An easy mouth is a great thing for a long journey, is it not, old fellow?" he said, patting my neck. Then he took the reins, and they both got up. I can remember how quietly he turned me round, and then with a light feel of the rein and drawing the whip gently across my back, we were off. I arched my neck and set off at my best pace. I found I had someone behind me who knew how a good horse ought to be driven. It seemed like old times again, and made me feel quite gay. This gentleman took a great liking to me, and after trying me several times with the saddle, he prevailed upon my master to sell me to a friend of his, who wanted a safe, pleasant horse for riding. And so it came to pass that in the summer I was sold to Mr. Berry. My new master was an unmarried man. He lived at Bath and was much engaged in business. His doctor advised him to take horse exercise, and for this purpose he bought me. He hired a stable a short distance from his lodgings, and engaged a man named Filcher as a groom. My master knew very little about horses, but he treated me well, and I should have had a good and easy place, but for circumstances of which he was ignorant. He ordered the best hay with plenty of oats, crushed beans and bran with vetches or ryegrass, as the man might think needful. I heard the master give the order, so I knew there was plenty of good food, and I thought I was well off. For a few days all went on well. I found that my groom understood his business. He kept the stable clean and airy, and groomed me thoroughly, and was never otherwise than gentle. He had been a hostler in one of the great hotels in Bath. He had given that up, and now cultivated fruit and vegetables for the market, and his wife bred and fattened poultry and rabbits for sale. After a while it seemed to me that my oats came very short. I had the beans, but bran was mixed with them instead of oats, of which there were very few, and certainly not more than a quarter of what should have been. In 2 or 3 weeks, this began to tell upon my strength and spirits. The grass food, though very good, was not the thing to keep up my condition without corn. However, I could not complain nor make known my wants, and so it went on for about 2 months, and I wondered that my master did not see that something was the matter. However, one afternoon he rode into the country to see a friend of his, a gentleman farmer, who lived on the road to Wells. This gentleman had a very quick eye for horses, and after he had welcomed his friend, he said, casting his eye over me, "It seems to me, Barry, that your horse does not look so well as he did when you first had him. Has he been well?" "Yes, I believe so," said my master, "but he is not nearly as lively as he was. My groom tells me that horses are always dull and weak in the autumn, and that I must expect it." "Autumn fiddlesticks," said the farmer. "Why, this is only August. With your light work and good food, he ought not to get down like this, even if it was autumn. How do you feed him?" My master told him. The other shook his head slowly and began to feel me all over. "I can't say who eats your corn, dear fellow, but I am much mistaken if your horse gets it. Have you ridden very fast?" "No, very gently." "Then put your hand here," he said, passing his hand over my neck and shoulder. "He is as warm and as damp as a horse who just came up from grass. I advise you to look into your stable a little more. I hate to be suspicious, and thank heaven I have had no cause to be, for I can trust my men, present or absent. But there are mean scoundrels, wicked enough to rob a dumb beast of his food. You must look into it." And turning to his man who had come to take me, "Give this horse a right good feed of bruised oats, and don't stint him." "Dumb beasts!" "Yes, we are, but if I could have spoken, I could have told my master where his oats went to. My groom used to come in every morning at about 6 o'clock, and with him a little boy who always had a covered basket with him. He used to go with his father into the harness room where the corn was kept, and I could see them, when the door stood ajar, fill a little bag with oats out of the bin, and then he used to be off. 5 or 6 mornings after this, just as the boy had left the stable, the door was pushed open and a policeman walked in, holding the child tight by the arm. Another policeman followed and locked the door on the inside, saying, 'Show me the place where your father keeps his rabbit's food.' The boy looked very frightened and began to cry, but there was no escape, and he led the way to the corn bin. Here the policeman found another empty bag like which was found full of oats in the boy's basket. Filcher was cleaning my feet at the time, but they soon saw him, and though he blustered a good deal, they walked him off to the lock-up, and his boy with him. I heard afterward that the boy was not held to be guilty, but the man was sentenced to prison for 2 months. My master was not immediately suited, but in a few days my new groom came. He was a tall, good-looking fellow enough, but if ever there was a humbug in the shape of a groom, Alfred Smirk was the man. He was very civil to me and never used me ill. In fact, he did a great deal of stroking and patting when his master was there to see it. He always brushed my mane and tail with water and my hooves with oil before he brought me to the door, to make me look smart. But as to cleaning my feet, or looking to my shoes, or grooming me thoroughly, he thought no more of that than if I had been a cow. He left my bit rusty, my saddle damp, and my crupper stiff. Alfred Smirk considered himself very handsome. He spent a great deal of time about his hair, whiskers, and necktie, before a little looking-glass in the harness-room. When his master was speaking to him, it was always, "Yes, sir, yes, sir," touching his hat at every word, and everyone thought he was a very nice young man, and that Mr. Barry was very fortunate to meet with him. I should say he was the laziest, most conceited fellow I have ever come near. Of course, it was a great thing to not be ill-used, but then a horse wants for more than that. I had a loose box, and might have been very comfortable if he had not been so indolent to clean it out. He never took all the straw away, and the smell from what lay underneath was very bad, while the strong vapours that rose made my eyes smart and inflame, and I did not feel the same appetite for my food. One day his master came in and said, "Alfred, the stable smells rather strong. Should not you give that stall a good scrub and throw down plenty of water?" "Well, sir," he said, touching his cap, "I'll do if you please, sir, but it is rather dangerous, sir, throwing around water in a horse's box. They are apt to take cold, sir. I should not like to do him an injury, sir, but I'll do it if you please, sir." "Well," said his master, "I should not like him to take cold, but I don't like the smell of the stable. Do you think the drains are all right?" "Well, sir, now that you mention it, I think the drain does sometimes send back a smell. There may be something wrong, sir." "Then send for the bricklayer and have it seen to," said his master. "Yes, sir, I will." The bricklayer came and pulled up a great many bricks, but found nothing amiss. So he put down some lime and charged the master 5 shillings, and the smell in my box was as bad as ever. But that was not all. Standing as I did on a quantity of moist straw, my feet grew unhealthy and tender, and the master used to say, "I don't know what is the matter with this horse. He goes very fumble-footed. I am sometimes afraid he will stumble." "Yes, sir," said Alfred. "I've noticed the same myself, sir, when I have exercised him." Now the fact was that he hardly ever did exercise me, and when the master was busy I often stood for days together without stretching my legs at all, and yet being fed just as high as if I were at hard work. This often disordered my health. It made me sometimes heavy and dull, but more often restless and feverish. He never even gave me a meal of green food or a bran mash, which would have cooled me, for he was altogether as ignorant as he was conceited. And then, instead of exercise or change of food, I had to take horse balls and draughts, which, beside the nuisance of having them poured down my throat, used to make me feel ill and uncomfortable. One day my feet were so tender that, trotting over some fresh stones with my master on my back, I made 2 such serious stumbles that, as he came down Lansdowne into the city, he stopped at the farrier's, and asked him to see what was the matter with me. The man took up my feet one by one and examined them. Then, standing up and dusting his hands one against the other, he said, "Well, your horse has got the thrush, and badly too. His feet are very tender. It is fortunate that he has not been down. I wonder if your groom has not seen to it before. This is the sort of thing we find in foul stables, where the litter is never properly cleaned out. If you will send him here tomorrow, I will attend to the hooves, and I will direct your man how to apply the liniment which I will give him." The next day I had my feet thoroughly cleansed and stuffed with tow soaked in some strong lotion, and an unpleasant business it was. The farrier ordered all the litter to be taken out of my box day by day, and the floor kept very clean. Then I was to have bran mashers, a little green food, and not so much corn till my feet were well again. With this treatment I soon regained my spirits, but Mr. Barry was so much disgusted at being twice deceived by his grooms that he determined to give up keeping a horse, and to hire when he wanted one. It was therefore kept till my feet were quite sound, and then was sold again. And that concludes our reading of Black Beauty by Anna Sewell, or at least these 4 chapters. Again, I feel so sorry for Black Beauty to sort of be bounced around, having to essentially be at the whim of those who are ignorant or unempathetic towards horses as living beings. Again, I think this translates well to all of us and is a good reflection of, it is so easy, and I think of the term of, and there's other people, services, people who work in the service industry, hospitality industry, how easy it is to show up and sort of remove ourselves from them. They are not necessarily people like us anymore. They exist to serve, and in this role of service, there is sort of this detachment of empathy, and sometimes, they are treated horribly in many cases for no reason. And we see this in the case with Black Beauty and how he has a good horse, a kind horse without vice, and even still, it is the ignorance of others that continues to wail down upon him, to hurt him, to exhaust him, when he is trying his best. But like we saw in the chapter, only ignorance and lack of empathy can do so much harm. And I feel terribly for Rory. Reading that chapter where that horse is injured, unfortunately, it is, I liken it akin to today, different technologies, but people remain the same. You see people often, speeding excessively or taking corners or taking chances with their vehicles. And this results in, the typical stereotype of wrapping around a telephone pole or other such accidents where innocent bystanders are injured. And in this case, Rory was injured by frankly, an idiot who was going way too fast, was not paying attention to where they were going, and was thinking only of himself, no empathy or even thought of consequence to action. And as a result, a horse was almost killed in a horrible, brutal way. So I don't know, these few chapters kind of made me reflect a bit on the idea of empathy, of thinking about, even if an animal like horses or any sort of domesticated animals are part of service, or even people, and especially people who are in service roles, we should not forget that they are living human beings with thoughts and emotions and can feel pain as well. And, we should expect certain things out of them in these service roles, but if things are happening, we should not immediately lash at them, whip them with either words or physically, and instead try to figure out what exactly is going on here. And like we saw in Only Ignorance, I feel sorry for Black Beauty. I think otherwise, if his master had been a little more inclined, but he was a busy man, and there's no harm in outsourcing, for something that you yourself do not have a skill for. But I feel sorry for Black Beauty there, through no fault of his own, and through no fault of the master, who was simply trying to find, good grooms. Unfortunately, in the grooming, there was, not earls or Johns or Joes out there, not all of them. And so Black Beauty is forced to deal with a thief who treated him relatively well in all other respects, but wasn't feeding him. He was letting this animal essentially starve in order to keep up his own family. If he had truly been hurting that much, I'm sure the master sounded like a kind man who would have helped him out, but instead he was stealing from the mouth of this horse and stealing from the hand of his master. And then the next gentleman, so conceited and so horrible as to let Black Beauty fester in his own stall, couldn't even be bothered to exercise him, couldn't be bothered to maintain everything, and again, hurting not only Black Beauty but the master who trusted him and was paying him to perform this service. And so with that rant being said, balance in everything is sort of what I get out of these 4 chapters, and the idea of, yes, when you are fulfilling a service role, when you are trained to something, there is an expectation for you to perform to a certain level. That is reasonable, that is good. But it is also beholden on the people to maintain that service, to help that service, who employ that service, to take care of whoever is fulfilling those roles. And again, it's just, society is such an intricate thing. I feel sorry for Black Beauty, who through the ignorance and the meanness, we're going to call it for what it is, meanness, of the grooms, suffered, and for their master, Mr. Barry. I actually feel sorry for him too, because he was busy. He wanted to provide. He obviously wanted to provide very well for this horse, but he was busy and, didn't have time to take care of the animal himself, and so he did what he thought was right with the information that he had at the time. And after twice being deceived so horribly, and as the result of being deceived horribly, his horse suffered, finally just said, I'm just going to go back to hiring a horse whenever I need one, instead of having to subject myself to losing money, losing respect, and also subjecting this horse to another potential terrible groom. Unfortunately, Black Beauty was sold again, and that always makes me sad, because I just want Black Beauty to have a home similar to where he had been before, where he was treated well, exercised, had friends. Horses are very social animals, and so to be alone like that is a dreadful thing. And so I will end my ramblings there for today. We will continue. We are now in part 3 of the book, and we should finish up actually perchance this week, if not drifting into next week, these readings. And I've been trying to work a little bit on the Vestavox episode here and there. I have an idea for some different artwork to utilize in it, but that is taking some time, and I hope it will be done before the Vestavox episode. And with that being said, I hope you all have a lovely week. Blessings, everyone, and I shall see you in the next video. Goodbye.